Finally, Maksara, much like the golem, was the last natural member of his race, known as the Naxians. Whilst many civilized worlds rightfully came to view the Naxians as monsters, Maksara always served as a reminder of the fact that not only were they once creatures capable of choosing between right and wrong, but that their fate could easily befall any civilized species in the galaxy. The Naxians were once a highly advanced race who believed in science rather than the black arts. They had progressed beyond a level 1 civilization in that they were able to harness all of the energy from their world and had even set up a thriving colony on a nearby planet. Unfortunately, their golden age was not to last. An attempt to harness the power from their sun instead created a series of solar waves that devastated the surface of their planet. With the colony cut off from the main world, it too began to die. All their technology and resources were unable to save them as the Naxians' sun continued to spiral out of control and bombard their planet. The radiation levels built up. More mutations were born. Animal and plant life began to wither and die. Nights and days became erratic, and their population dwindled from almost 100 billion to only a couple of hundred in less than a century. It was at this point, when the last Naxians were living a pitiful, nomadic existence, that a demon named Aeschylus visited their world. This demon was known and despised on many civilized worlds throughout the galaxy, including our own. Though he had the power of a god, he preferred manipulation and getting species and creatures to willingly choose damnation. He appealed to species and people when they were at their most desperate, promising them power and salvation by transforming them into demons. He corrupted thousands of worlds. over the course of his immortal life this way, but the Naxians proved to be his greatest masterpiece. The surviving Naxian leaders and the majority of their people agreed to the demon's terms. Even though he made it very clear that they would become creatures of evil like he was, they still accepted. It is easy for us in hindsight to judge the Naxians for this, but again, who is to say that we, or indeed any other sentient race, would not do the same if faced with our own end? None of us are really prepared for our mortality as individuals, never mind the mortality of our species. Imagine knowing that your generation was to be the final generation, that your ancestors' centuries of struggling was for nothing, that you had failed where all others before had thrived. Every single sentient species in the universe would do whatever it could to avoid that fate. Most simply haven't had the opportunity that the Naxians had, and were forced to go quietly into the night. Still, having said that, not all of the Naxians agreed to become demons. A small handful, led by Maksara, actively attempted to stop the demon from tempting the rest of their kind. Sadly, their attempts failed, and they were imprisoned by their new demonic brethren and subject to horrific torture for decades for their perceived treachery. After becoming demonic, the Naxians used their newfound understanding of the black arts to travel to other planets across the galaxy. They destroyed countless worlds and races, all to satisfy their new bloodlust and sadism, all while forcing the last surviving members of what they used to be to watch. All of the survivors were driven insane except for Maksara, who just became determined to ensure that his ancestors' struggles and accomplishments would not only lead to the bloodshed and horrors his fellow kind were now committing. Maksara escaped after the first 100 or so years of his people's conquest and aided numerous other species in battling them. Ironically, the magics they had used to keep Maksara alive for decades of torture ended up granting him immortality. Maksara also drew on the magics of his people's home planet that they were more vulnerable to, which he was able to do more than any of the Naxians' other enemies due to having been born there to fight back against them. Sadly, it would take him many thousands of years to put a serious dent in their power. Unlike other intergalactic conquerors, however, such as the Hylexans, the Naxians never gave the races they invaded the option of surrender. They also never harvested the supplies and resources of the worlds they conquered. Instead, they used the blackest magics to completely destroy all life from each planet. They also never forgot a defeat. One world known as Descania resisted an invasion from these demonic conquerors 10 times over the course of 1,000 years. It was able to do so due to the fact that the planet's distinct magic was toxic to the Naxians. Eventually, however, with the aid of a double agent, the Naxians finally prevailed and made sure that the Descanians' destruction was far more prolonged and horrific than those of the other races they wiped out in the process. The entire planet was reduced to dust afterwards to prevent anyone from ever using its magic again. In spite of their power, the demonic invaders were later finally pushed back by an alliance of many different species which Maksara assembled. Towards the end of this galactic war, the Naxians turned their attention towards a small world that existed far beyond that of their enemies' influence, Earth. Ironically, the monsters only learned about our planet thanks to Maksara, who had discovered the Earth in the 1970s when he was searching for planets with unusual magical structures to harness their power against the Naxians. The Earth interested Maksara, not just because of its unusual combination of magics at its centre, but also because it contained the magic from Descania, which the gods had used when helping to rebuild the Earth after Set's attacks centuries ago. With this new supply of Descanian magic, Maksara was able to achieve one of his greatest victories against his people who were caught completely off guard. Sadly, the rest of the Naxians were eventually able to discover the Earth's location after capturing a small sample of the magic. A special group of Naxians was sent to investigate the Earth in secret, who discovered its unique structure and began attempting to harness our planet's power from a secret underwater lair for many decades. As the war heated up, and the Naxians were pushed back further by the Alliance, pressure was put on the Naxian team on Earth to find something that could help them win, and also to destroy the planet to prevent more Descanian magic from being used. When Maksara found out about the plan in the final days of the war, which he gleaned from a captured Naxian base, he instantly headed for Earth. He had not let anyone else know about the planet, as he did not want to alert any other aliens or demons to its unique magical structure for its sake, and destroyed the information in the Naxian base. He also did not trust either the government of any nation on Earth or even any of the organizations that had been set up to combat the supernatural. Fact is, very few of even the most skilled witches and sorcerers had even scratched the surface of the extent of the wide array of magics beneath the Earth, and Maksara didn't want to introduce humanity to this strange new force before it could handle it. Instead, Maksara sought out the planet's most noteworthy heroes and distinctive magical creatures. Even then, however, he was limited in the time he had, with his people now finally putting their plan into action. The Naxians' plan was to drain magic from the points of the Earth where the different magics had been fused together. Not only would they be able to gain access to some of the most powerful and unique magics buried deep in the planet, but disrupting them would literally rip the Earth apart at the seams. In the few days he had to scour our entire world in his vessel, Maksara, based on stories he had heard on his previous visits to Earth, and other small bits of information he could glean, was able to track down Vincent, the Medusa, Claudia, Adrian, and the Golem, one after another. Of all of them, Vincent took the most persuasion, as he did not like leaving Masters for too long. The Medusa and the Golem were both only too happy to join the mission, as at that point they were both in something of a rut. Their companions had long since moved on, or died, and they were all alone and somewhat aimless, merely travelling from town to town, fighting random monsters without any plan or goal. Claudia, meanwhile, was also happy to get out of her hometown for a while, as more and more attention was being drawn to Lady Squid than she would have liked. Adrian, on the other hand, was also somewhat reluctant, like Vincent, though more due to his bad experiences with Alan. Ironically, however, this very mission, and the family he would make during it, helped to restore his faith in people or creatures somewhat. Each of the group was selected, not just for their history and skills, but also because they all, bar Claudia, represented a unique combination of magic that couldn't be found anywhere else on the planet, which could potentially come in useful against the Naxians. Claudia, meanwhile, was also chosen because the Naxians had a fear of monsters, as they were among the few species more evil and destructive than they were. It was a long and hard battle that took the newly formed Spook Family, as it would become known, all around the Earth, but in the end they were able to defeat the Naxian menace. Unfortunately, however, the Naxians' actions had led to many other species and powers becoming aware of the Earth's unique magical properties. Maksara decided to stay on our planet to protect it, as it was, in some ways, his fault that the Naxians had been made aware of our world in the first place. He kept the group together to help him defend our planet, which they were only too happy to do. For the next 30 years until the 2020s, the Spook Family continued to defend the Earth from a multitude of threats, ranging from alien invaders to demons to vampires to monsters to supervillains of various kinds. They also even took to the stars on many occasions, including to continue Maksara's war against his vile people. Sadly, what became of them is not known, other than that they appeared to disband in the mid-2020s. It is known that Vincent, ironically, was able to gather several of the survivors of the Cushing family around the world back into Masters, where they soon became a power again. Alistair, the father of the soldiers of the Nexus, was descended from this group of Cushings. Claudia, on the other hand, joined the enigmatic time traveller from another universe, Dr. Omega, in the early 21st century. Adrian, meanwhile, would also travel through time, joining 2 different time travellers on their exploits. Vincent is believed to have finally met his end in the mid-21st century, though there are some who dispute this, arguing that, ironically, the Cushings he gathered together eventually turned on him and he simply left Masters. Either way, his legacy would live on in the Cushings he gathered together, as well as the Spook family's exploits. Sadly, what became of the Medusa and Maksara is not known, though there are some who say they still walk the earth today in the 25th century, battling evil. Others believe this to be wishful thinking. Whatever their ultimate fate, the Spook family serve as a symbol of both heroism and unity for both the paranormal and the natural world.